Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Bitcoin, and we're going to be discussing the return on investment, or ROI, after the halving. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. Let's go ahead and jump in. Now, we did see Bitcoin come back down to around $60,000. And so I thought maybe why not check back in with this chart, because one of the things that we've actually seen occur over the last couple of cycles is the halving arrives. Everyone expects the price of Bitcoin to go parabolic after. Well, maybe not everyone, right? But a lot of people think that the price of Bitcoin just goes parabolic immediately after the halving. History shows that's actually not often the case, except for the first halving, right? After the first halving, you can see that that price really did go up. But last time in after the third halving, we saw price generally increase, and so everyone has that in the back of their mind, right? They're thinking about what happened last cycle. But last cycle, when the price basically just went up following the halving, right? If you look at halving cycle 3, you can see that after the halving arrived, the price did not ever go back below the price of Bitcoin when the halving occurred, right? You can see that it was just higher lows after that. And so I think a lot of people went into this halving thinking that you would see something very similar, where you just get, higher lows following the halving. And that's why there was a lot of people really excited when Bitcoin went back up to $70,000. But remember, oftentimes going into the summer, there is a bounce by Bitcoin, in May/June, and then oftentimes we'll see some form of a boring summer, right? So I think a lot of people were thinking about, all right, well, what if it just follows last cycle after the halving, and that's what they had in mind, right? But last cycle, for those that were here last cycle, what a lot of us were talking about was, would there be a post-halving dump? And the reason we spoke about that last cycle was because in halving cycle 2, there was a post-halving dump. And you can see, in fact, that we didn't actually get back above the price of Bitcoin at the halving durably until about 3.5 months later, 3 to 3.5 months later. And so I even did a video on it back in 2020. I was like, well, what Bitcoin post-halving dump? Because a lot of people were talking about it based on what happened in 2016. We didn't get it, right? It just basically went up. And so it almost like it sort of flip-flops what it does, right? So after the first halving, price also, I don't believe it went below where it opened after the halving, right? You can see that right there. And then after the third halving, right, it also didn't go below that level. But after halving cycle 2 and halving cycle 4, it has. So there's a clear difference, right? There's a clear difference, and you can see how from one halving to another, right, it sort of rotates. Halving cycles 1 and 3, it did not go below the price after the halving. Halving cycles 2 and 4, it did. And in fact, if you measure the ROI of Bitcoin after the halving, it's currently at 0.93, which is essentially the same, or actually it's at 0.94, 0.938 to be exact, right? But about 0.94, which coincidentally is the same spot it was after halving cycle 2 after 67 days, right? Now, I wouldn't expect it to follow it exactly. We should not expect that. In fact, it hasn't been following it exactly. You can see that this year, after this halving, we actually went positive from the price at the halving for a while, whereas in 2016 we barely saw any positive price action above the ROI or above the price at the halving until about 3.5 months later. So again, I just wanted to pull this chart up and show you where we are and say, look, this is where we were in 2016. I make a lot of comparisons to 2019, primarily just because of monetary policy, but I think there are some reasons to compare to 2016 as well, not only because of Bitcoin, but also what ETH is doing and what ETH Bitcoin is doing and so on and so forth. So, if you are more so in the 2016 camp, and you're looking at just say USD valuations, right? If you're in the 2016 camp, then why not look at the ROI after the 2016 halving, right? And you can see that even after the third halving, I mean, while price did go up a bit around the summer, it didn't really get into gear until the fourth quarter of the year. So, there's a decent chance that the price could still be relatively suppressed for a while. And we've actually talked a lot about that. And I mean, again, there's other ways to measure the ROI as well. You could look at the ROI after cycle peak and see, I mean, if you just look at the last couple of cycles, you can see how far ahead of the last two cycles we are right now, right? So, I mean, when you look at this, one of the reasons why we talk about 2019 so much is because in 2019 we saw a very similar thing where the ROI after the peak, we had this bear market, we had a sort of a QT bull market, a bull market as rates were elevated, and before rate cuts began, Bitcoin also got ahead of where it was the prior cycle, but then ultimately we saw some form of mean reversion back to where it should have been, right, in quotes, right, where it should have been. And of course we got the pandemic, which caused it to overshoot and go lower than sort of that mean reversion. And so that's that's one of the reasons why I look at that 2019 comparison, because what if this is just sort of a similar thing as this, and then you ultimately get that mean reversion back to where it quote unquote should be. Although of course it's market, there's no such thing as where it should be. But I think it's an interesting way to look at the market and to say, look, guys, at this point in the last two cycles, I mean, look at the screen, right? If you measure it from the peak, the last two cycles, the ROI from the peak was still at 0.57, right? So that means that at this point in the last two cycles, Bitcoin was still 43% down from the all-time high, right? Right now, we're only 10% down from the 2021 all-time high. So it really goes to show just how accelerated this move has been. And so, if you do see the market cool off into the summer, it might bring in that 2019 comparison even more. And also, if you do, it could make that 2016 comparison when thinking about the ROI after the halving even more, believable, because you can see back over here, Bitcoin didn't really pick up steam until much later. Right, I mean, about 160 days after the halving. But remember, back then the halving was in this is 2016, so the halving would have been in July, and so that would have been about half a year later before it really started to move. So I think that's a good way to look at the market. Measure it ROI after the halving, measure it ROI after the peak, and of course you can also look at it ROI after the lows. And if you measure it this way, we are still above the last two cycles in terms of where they were at this point in the cycle, which is, it's remarkable, just how similar it is. And if you look at last cycle, there was a period where we got extended, and then we slowly got back down to where the prior cycle was. And then now it almost looks like you're seeing something very, very similar, where it's gotten extended and then it's slowly making its way back down to where the prior cycle was. And so, right now we are still about 3.8x above the lows. You can see that it took until day 670 or 680 or so for last cycle for that ROI from the low to get durably above that multiple. And that's, 680 days. We're currently only on 580, 588. I mean, that's another 3 months, which again, that would get you through Q3. So I think there's a case to be made, as we've been talking about for a good part of this year. I think there's a good case to be made that you just get this summer lull, right? Boring phase in the market, allow those alts to keep on bleeding back to Bitcoin. Damn, I said it again, right? But allow that to happen, allow the dominance to go higher. And then, you get out into Q4, and then, then we see what awaits us then. But yeah, those are my views on the market. And it's all, and again, one of the things, if you look at I just say Bitcoin USD, where it currently is, it's currently at around $60,000. We really haven't had that many large pullbacks, right? A lot of these pullbacks have actually been relatively muted, especially compared to last cycle. I mean, these pullbacks are basically just like 20% pullbacks. You know, essentially all of them. Even this one, it was still only about a 23% pullback. So last cycle, we actually, you know, after that 2019 top, we ended up getting, you know, about a 50% pullback. I mean, obviously it went further down because of the pandemic later on, but I mean, it does go to show that, and even if you're in the 2016 camp, right? I mean, even in the 2016 camp, there were still some, you know, some more or some larger pullbacks, like 30, 40%. But I think, you know, in the same way that we've talked about diminishing returns, you're also likely going to see diminishing volatility as well as the cycles go on, just because it takes exponentially more and more money to move the price. But that's where we are. That's the video. We looked at ROI after the halving. We looked at ROI after the peak, and we looked at ROI after the low. Hopefully that gets you, you know, sort of an encompassing view of the market, where we are, and we'll see what happens over the next few months. Just remember, I mean, this move right here that we just got. I mean, this is exactly what we saw, you know, last year for the most. I mean, the only main difference is that it didn't put in a new high, right? You see that, right? So this one did not actually take out the prior high, whereas last year it actually did. So that's kind of a subtle difference. But we'll continue to follow that and see where Bitcoin comes in. But again, you know, back in late April, early May, we talked about how there's this mantra that people talk about, and that's sell in May and go away, because oftentimes in late April the market sells off. Usually what happens in May is you get this rally after everyone sort of sings the song of sell in May, go away. You saw the same thing actually in 2021, right? A sell-off in late April, and then you get this rally in May. You know, so everyone screams here, sell in May and go away, and then you get a rally that lasts several weeks, and then you get a summer lull, right? So, I mean, again, it looks kind of similar to me. And I mean, you know, you could certainly have a deeper pullback as well, back into the 50s. I do think that's certainly possible. If it is 2019, which I know a lot of people push back against, and they say it's 2016. Again, I'm not saying it can't be. I'm just saying if it is 2019 all over again, then what you would generally expect would be to kind of stay around these levels for a little bit. I mean, it doesn't mean you can't go back down and go back into the 50s, but you can see here, right, it got a high, a lower high, and then a lower high. It came back down to the lows and then got one final bounce, but it was a really pathetic bounce off the lows, and then it ended up falling below support. So if it is 2019, you would still expect it to sort of bounce around for a little while longer at the very least. And so yeah, that's where we are, guys. That's where we are in the market. Those are the ROI after the different time frames. We'll see what happens. Just remember, a lot of times people expect prices to go parabolic right after the halving, and with the exception of the first halving, that's not what we normally see. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and again, check out Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.